Now, when we come to a book like Ezekiel, the fundamentalists have played havoc with this book. Many of them very good people. This is a book called Through Turmoil to Peace. We have people here who know the author or did know him, A.W. Anderson, father of Roy Anderson. Good man. I knew him, corresponded with him for years. This book echoed what the fundamentalists in America were teaching, that Ezekiel 38 and 39 foretold that one day Russia would invade Palestine, all nations would gather there, and Armageddon would take place. That is still believed by millions of fundamentalist Christians, particularly in America, not Europe, not England, but particularly America and Australia. Russia is going to invade Palestine. All nations will gather there for the Battle of Armageddon. That'll be the end of the world. And associated with that, there's to be a rebuilt temple at Jerusalem, like the temple described in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48. This teaching has meant that millions and millions of dollars have poured into Palestine for an extremist group in that country. You must always remember, only 1 in 10 Israelis believes the Old Testament. 9 out of 10 people in Palestine, among the Israelis, laugh at the Old Testament. Most Israelis are atheists. 1 in 10 are what we call Orthodox. And so fundamentalist Christians have poured millions of dollars because of the way they interpret the book of Ezekiel into Palestine, and the unbelieving Israelis laugh behind their backs. They say how stupid these Americans are. How can they be so silly? Well, here's a book called Through Turmoil to Peace, and people who know its history says it brought more turmoil than peace. Because the good man that wrote it couldn't know everything. None of us do. The Bible is an infinite book. Jill said to me coming along in the car this afternoon, and she said, "What do you know?" I said, "Not much." She said, What else do you know?" I said, "Well, there's a lot to learn." And it doesn't matter who you are, the Bible is an infinite book, and none of us know much. But we must strive with all that God gives us to study the book aright and avoid theories and teachings that shut the ears of people. Now we live in a university world where most people in the West have laboured long to get a BA or an MA or a PhD or the whole collection. And along with the fatal presuppositions they have inherited, they have learned a bit of history and a bit of science, which makes them invulnerable to the fundamentalist approach on the gospel. So as you and I begin to look at Ezekiel, I have to warn you, this is a difficult book. The Jews were forbidden to read it till they were 30. I'm a bit over 30, so it's easy for me to have a shot at it. But the Jews were forbidden to look at it till 30. Here's a book where you'll read about a desert of dry bones suddenly coming together, flesh covering it, breath coming into it, standing on its feet a great army. Here's a book that will tell us of a trickling stream ebbing out from under the temple, heading down for the Dead Sea. Now remember, the Dead Sea is the chamber of horrors in Palestine. As soon as the fish from the Jordan hit the Dead Sea, they die. It's 28% salt. When you and I go swimming in the sea, it's 5% salt. If you swim the Dead Sea, you can't sink, so it's okay if you can't swim. But there's so much chemicals there. But it's deadly. But here's a story in this book. We'll tell of a tiny rivulet leaving from under the temple, passing by the altar of burnt sacrifice, going down to the Dead Sea, and wherever it goes, there's life, there's trees, there's fruitfulness. And when it reaches the Dead Sea, the waters are healed. That's quite a story. And then after you read that, you recall, hey, this is part of a picture of a new Palestine, where there'll be a temple bigger than the city of Jerusalem, and where there'll be a Jerusalem bigger than all of Palestine. You say, hey, how can that be? The clue, of course, is well known to people familiar with literature. Sometimes jokingly, when I'm in controversy with certain friends, jokingly I say, you've not read enough novels. What I really mean, because I was once a fictionaholic, and I had to give it up. If I hadn't given it up, I'd never have gone to university. I'd never been able to write anything or do anything. But my point is, if you don't understand the nature of literature, you don't understand the Bible. The person who only knows the Bible does not know the Bible. That is very important. The Bible is literature. This book has plays. We read of him taking a huge tile and picturing Jerusalem on it, then picturing an enemy army coming along, picturing a siege using a huge tile. We'll read of him one night having summoned all the leaders of the people to watch him, puts a knapsack on, makes a hole in the wall, and creeps out. This book contains plays, dramatized versions of truth meant to arrest attention. This book contains parables. It contains proverbs. It contains prophecies. But most of all, it contains visions, and the visions are never meant to be understood literally. The Chinese have a proverb, one picture is worth 1,000 words. And when you read the last book of the Bible, it talks in the beginning about a revelation that God gave to John, and it says he sent and signified it, signified it, sent it by signs and symbols. This is where you read about a woman seated on a terrible beast that has 7 heads. You wonder whether the lady's drunk, but there she is. This is a book that tells us about Christ coming on a white horse like a sword swallower. A sword's coming out of his mouth. This is a book that tells us about rivers and seas being turned to blood. It's a book of symbols. It's a book that pictures a great red dragon chasing a beautiful girl through heaven. Now, that's quite something, isn't it? Do you think heaven's like that? Revelation 12. Great red dragon. And he pursues this woman. And then the earth opens up and swallows the great flood of persecution. It's pictures. It's symbols. Armageddon is not a literal war in literal Palestine. It's a global conflict between good and evil at the end of the world. And we'll all be in it if we're still alive. So, as we begin to look at Ezekiel a little more closely, I have to remind you of these things, that the book is infinite. None of us know much. It's been my main concern now for 70 years, and I confess that I am an ignoramus, but I try to make plain the things that are very plain, and I work on the rest. But none of us know much. But it is literature, and we are to approach it as literature.